I was drained from the horrors of the last several hours and wanted a bed desperately. The thought of returning to Molly's house tore my heart and took the air from my lungs. The thought of my apartment made me instantly feel paranoid and isolated. The thought of entering a random house made me think of creatures in the shadows and blood. After putting thought into it, I settled on a cozy, classic country cabins. A sort of casual retreat, tucked away into the forest on the outskirts of town where several small cabins were nuzzled in the trees. They were spread out in a half circle behind the main office. The open space in the middle was a parking area. Each cabin looked cozy, wooden, and classic. The inside looked like a small country home. They were the size of a high-priced hotel room. Not too small, too large, room to breathe, but still cozy. People in town used the cabins just as much as travelers. They were perfect for weekend getaways. Most important to me though, they still used metal keys. I pulled off to the side of the road for a short distance from the cabins and made my way through the trees. I wanted to make sure it was unoccupied. I listened for any noises and heard nothing. I made my way around, peering into windows, searching the grounds for signs of disturbance. Empty. The main office was unlocked, and I easily found a set of keys. After retrieving my mum's car, I parked it behind my cabin for the night, got into bed with only a quick look around to make sure the cabin was empty, and fell asleep, holding Molly's book and Scarlet's kitten. I spent time drifting in and out of sleep. I barely got enough rest to continue the day. I gave myself a bottle of water to bathe, which I admit did help me wake up a little and made me feel a lot better, and slid on clean clothes I had grabbed from the store, which helped even more. I gathered everything up and sat in my mum's car. I thought about leaving town, going to the city, seeing if I could find someone who might know what happened to everyone. I realized I'd have no idea where to go. I grabbed my backpack, bottle of water, and a box of cereal and returned to the cabin and read Molly's book until the sun went down. I thought it might be safer to be in town when I could hide under the cover of darkness. When the sun was down and complete darkness filled the world beyond the cabin window, I loaded everything up and drove into town. It had changed. There were no bodies on the streets. The glass had been removed from the sidewalks. Broken windows had the glass removed and boarded up. Some stores were completely cleaned out. Vehicles were cleaned from the streets and nowhere to be seen. I parked in a large alleyway. It was eerie to park on an empty street. Very slowly, very carefully, I wandered the streets. The stores that had anything useful for survival had been cleared out. This was the work of several organized people. This should have comforted me, but instead it terrified me. I ended up in a park, different from the one the boy had died in. I found a tree to sit and rest against, completely hidden by large tree roots and darkness. I got lost in my thoughts of good times with Molly and Scarlet. A shadow of a smile crossed my lips, and for a while I was almost happy. I was pulled from my memories by the sounds of running footsteps. I stood and waited. The lights came into view down the street. Someone was being chased by a small group. I pulled out a handgun, not confident in my shooting, but figured if I waited for the person to pass and just started to fire into the group, the person being chased would be safe. Even if I didn't kill the chasers, I might injure them or at least get them to run the other way. The person being chased had almost reached the park when I saw the phantoms in the darkness. A person ran into the trees, slid behind one of the larger ones and stopped. She wasn't breathing hard, so she couldn't have been running for long. When the chasers got close to the trees, I heard what sounded like guns with silencers. One of the people in the group dropped. It was over in seconds. The bodies were silently tossed into the back of a nearby truck. The girl was given a bottle of what I could only assume to be water. Another girl was hugged by several others before she wandered away from the trees, slowly drifting down the street. Bait. I realized she was bait. The others faded back into the darkness. I was unsure of what to do. There might be good people getting rid of X's, or they could have been X's of a different kind. I sat back down and watched. After a while, running footsteps began echoing down the streets again. It happened the same as before. The runner dashed into the trees. The X's followed. When they were close, I heard silenced guns. The X's all dropped, their bodies disposed of. Part of me wanted to get their attention, let them know I wanted peace and be welcomed into their group. I wanted to be told what was going on in the world. Part of me wanted to sneak away and run far, far away. I decided I didn't want to be noticed just yet, and so I continued to wait and watch. A few hours later, two people slowly made their way down the street. When they got into the trees, lights turned on. A teenage girl handed over a teenage boy to the group in the trees. She was handed a bottle she drank deeply from. The boy was given some sort of wipes to clean his hands and face, a bottle, and food. He was led to a car and driven away. I made my decision. I stood, took a few steps away from the tree, and softly drummed an empty water bottle against my hand. The beams of light instantly covered me, blinded me. I dropped the bottle, raised one hand to shield my eyes, waved to them with the other. I heard footsteps running towards me. For a few seconds, fear ran down my spine. Then I realized there was only one set of feet. The next thing I knew, someone had slammed into me, wrapped their arms around me, and buried their head against my neck, which was quickly becoming wet. I used both my hands to block the light and looked down. Into red hair. Molly's hair. I wrapped my arms around her and just held her. I held her as tight as I could. Tears poured from my eyes. The lights turned away from us, and the group around us returned to the darkness, giving Molly and me our privacy. Time ceased to exist. For the first time in my life, I held Molly, and Molly held me. After our tears ran dry, Molly lightly pulled away, but kept an arm around me, held my hand in hers, and led me to the park's bathroom. There were chairs set up and candles on the counter, giving us plenty of soft light. A few people sat in chairs, each with a notebook and pen in their hands. Molly grabbed 2 notebooks and pens, pulled us down into 2 chairs, and we told each other our stories. Molly had been at work when she got a call about Scarlett. Her memory got a little fuzzy for a while after that. She remembered a flash of someone helping her into the passenger seat of a car, a flash being at the hospital, sitting in a chair alone, and her husband was there holding her. People around her were talking, but she couldn't understand a word they said. No one made any attempt to speak, no attempt to move. Then, everyone around her began to die. When her husband died, she panicked and ran to her parents' house. They weren't there, so she let herself in, and after pacing and crying for a while, she turned on the TV. There were no newscasters, but there was text sliding across the screen. Some unknown cause was killing people when they spoke. She just sat, watching the same text roll by. She had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up and crying. She was awakened by the sound of knocking. She had rushed to the door. Someone had been holding a sign that read, "Don't speak. Sound causes the laughter." Behind them, someone was holding up notebooks and pens. By this time, most of the people in the town had died. They told her that they had no idea what had caused this to happen, but they were not going to give up hope. Several people had gathered together to do what they could about making the best of what was happening. After a lot of discussion, they had a plan. One of the people in the group worked at the biggest hotel in town. It also happened to be one of the fanciest. They'd all gone through all the rooms in the hotel, manually removing the locks on all the doors. They wanted people to have their privacy, but they didn't want any dead bodies locked in rooms. Cards were taped to each door with the names of the room's residents. They created several jobs for people both in and out of the hotel. In the hotel, there were people who did their best to keep the hotel clean, people who separated the foods, liquids, bedding, clothes, and other useful things into organized rooms, people who took care of the children who had survived. For obvious reasons, no infants or toddlers had survived. There was also a place set up for a makeshift hospital. Anyone with any medical knowledge stayed there. She didn't mention all the jobs people had in the hotel, but she did imply there were a lot for people to do. There was also a lot to be done outside the hotel. Some tried to find survivors, some gathered food and other things needed for survival and took it back to the hotel. Some gathered bodies to be burnt, some cleaned the streets of glass and debris, some boarded up windows, and some took care of the X-ers, which they called by a different name. The organization of the group had formed quickly. At times like this, people don't just sit around and wait. They want to get up, be productive, and do something, anything. If someone is willing to step up and be a leader, people will follow. There had been meetings on what needed to be done, how to go about doing it, goals for the survivors, and so on. There had been debates about the animals in town, the pets left behind. Some people wanted all the animals to be gathered, kept alive like cattle, and used for fresh meat. Most of the people in the meeting horrified at the thought of eating pets. In the end, it had been decided the aggressive animals would be put down, and the friendly animals would be allowed in the hotel as pets. Molly had instantly joined the group to eliminate the X-ers. The best shooters and runners in the group worked together to bait and kill the monsters. It turned out Molly was an excellent runner. She'd been our school's best track star in decades. She'd kept it up after high school to stay in shape, not only jogging but sprint running. She'd constantly been trying to beat her own records. She always loved running and found it fun and relaxing. She never thought it would save her life and the lives of others. She admitted it terrified her every time she went out. She knew she was taking a risk, knew she might not make it back. For her it was worth it, a truly worthy cause. She couldn't understand how people could murder for pleasure, especially after what had just happened to the world. When I told Molly my story, I was vague about where I'd gone. I was not sure how she'd feel about the time I'd spent in her house. I told her I'd looked for her, but moved on quickly. For a moment I thought about returning Scarlett's kitten to Molly, but realized if she'd wanted something of Scarlett, she would return to the house and gotten it herself. But it would have been a constant reminder of what she'd lost. I told her I had my mom's car packed a short distance away, filled with supplies. She wrote a quick note to one of the people near her, and held my hand as I led her to the car. I knew the hotel was being used as a headquarters, and we headed towards it, in silence.